In court, my ex's lawyer said, "Your Honor, she's emotionally unstable, financially incompetent, and fundamentally unfit to raise a child." The judge nodded. Until my 8-year-old stood up and said, "My mom raised me without his money, without his help, and while working 3 jobs just to keep us going. She never gave up. I love her more than anyone in the world." The courtroom went dead silent. "Your Honor, she's emotionally unstable, financially incompetent, and fundamentally unfit to raise a child." That's what my ex's lawyer said about me right there in the courtroom, loud, clear, every word like a knife. I sat frozen, gripping the edge of my seat, staring at the man who once promised to love me forever. He didn't even look my way, just kept his arms folded like he was proud of what his attorney was saying. I glanced at my son Jaden, 8 years old, feet barely touching the floor in the gallery bench behind me, sitting next to my sister. He was quiet, but his hands were clenched into little fists in his lap. He was listening to every word. My heart sank. The judge didn't say anything right away. He just nodded slowly, flipping through his notes like he was absorbing it all. The silence that followed was suffocating. That nod, it felt like a verdict before the ruling was even spoken. As if everything I had poured into raising my son meant nothing, like my exhaustion made me unfit, like my broken bank account made me a bad mother. Then something happened. Something no one expected. Jaden stood up. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait to be invited. He just stood up with this fire in his eyes I had never seen before, not even when he was mad about losing his toy dragon. And in the clearest voice he said, "My mom raised me without his money, without his help. She worked 3 jobs just to keep us going. She never gave up. I love her more than anyone in the world." You could hear the air leave the room. Every head turned. The court clerk stopped typing. Even the judge blinked like he wasn't sure he heard correctly. My son kept standing there, brave, honest, unshaken, no script, no coaching, just his truth. That's when everything changed. Before that courtroom, before the judge and the lawyers and the silence that followed my son's words, I was just a mom doing the best I could with what I had. My name is Celine Harper. I'm 32 years old, and I live in a small 2-bedroom apartment just outside Columbus, Ohio. It's not fancy. The walls are thin, the carpets are old, and the heater rattles every time it kicks on. But it's clean, it's warm, and it's home. I've been raising my son Jaden on my own since he was 4 months old. His father Brandon left us when I was still recovering from a C-section. He said he wasn't ready to be a father, just packed a duffel bag, left a voicemail, and stopped answering my calls. The last thing he said to me was, "You'll be better off without me." He was wrong, but not in the way he meant. He thought leaving would free me. All it did was light a fire in me I didn't know I had. At first I was terrified. I had no real savings, no family close by, and no idea how I was going to raise a child alone. I was 24 with no degree, just a high school diploma and a few community college credits. I had worked retail before Jaden was born. After Brandon left, I applied to every job I could find within bus distance of our apartment. I landed 3. Weekday mornings at a diner, evenings at a dental clinic as a front desk receptionist, and weekend shifts walking dogs for a local service app. I didn't sleep much that first year. I learned how to power nap during Jaden's nap times, how to budget groceries to the dollar, and how to make a single box of pasta last 3 meals. But somehow, we made it work. Jaden grew. So did I. He's always been a quiet kid but not shy. Just thoughtful. He watches people. He picks up on tone, on mood, on the little things. When he was 5, he asked me why I always looked tired. I told him it was because I worked a lot. He nodded and handed me his favorite stuffed bear to keep me company when I couldn't sleep. Those years were hard, but they were ours. I taught him how to read, how to tie his shoes, how to tell the truth even when it's hard. He taught me patience, resilience, and how to laugh again when everything felt heavy. I never bad-mouthed his father to him. I wanted Jaden to make up his own mind. Every now and then he'd ask where Brandon was and I'd say, "He's not here right now, but you have me." Jaden would hug me and say, "That's enough." Then one day Brandon came back out of nowhere. It had been almost 4 years since I'd heard from him. He showed up at my work, clean-shaven, in a tailored coat, smiling like we were old friends catching up. I didn't even know how to look at him. He said he wanted to reconnect, not with me, with Jaden. He said he'd matured, that he was engaged now, that his fiancée wanted to meet her future stepson. I didn't trust a word of it. Not after the years of silence, not after I had begged him for formula money and gotten nothing but blocked numbers. But I didn't want to be unfair either. I told him he could write Jaden a letter, and we'd go from there. The next thing I got wasn't a letter. It was a custody petition full of legal jargon and accusations. Brandon was suing for partial custody, claiming I was emotionally unstable and financially unfit to raise our son alone. I laughed when I first read it. Laughed in that shocked, shaky kind of way when something is so absurd it feels like a joke. I couldn't believe it. This man who hadn't bought a single diaper was now claiming I wasn't stable enough to be a mother. I scraped together what I could and found a public defender willing to represent me. She was kind, but overworked. I felt like I was walking into a storm barefoot holding Jaden's hand, praying we wouldn't get blown away. The night before court, I tucked Jaden into bed like always. He asked why I looked nervous. I told him, "Tomorrow is an important day, baby, but I'm gonna be okay, you're safe." He looked at me for a long second and said, "You always say that when you're scared." He was right. I was scared, not because I thought Brandon could prove I was a bad mother, but because I knew how the world often listens to money, not truth. Brandon had lawyers. I had a file folder of pay stubs, a list of neighbors willing to vouch for me, and my son's drawings taped to the fridge. But I also had something stronger than all of that. I had raised a boy who knew the truth, who had seen it, who had lived it with me, and the next day, he proved it in front of everyone. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not just the air, but the energy. Pale walls, polished wood, stiff chairs that didn't allow for much comfort. It was the kind of place that made you sit straighter, speak softer, and question your own confidence before you ever opened your mouth. Brandon showed up in a tailored navy blue suit, the kind that fit too well to be off the rack. He sat at the polished oak table beside his attorney, a sharp woman named Carla with perfectly ironed slacks and a voice that sounded like it was trained to win. His fiancée sat behind him, legs crossed, sunglasses perched on her head like this was just another brunch stop. I wore my one good blazer, the one I used for job interviews. It had a thread loose at the cuff, but I'd pressed it the night before. Jaden sat in the gallery with my younger sister Mia. She had driven in from Cincinnati to help watch him, her hand resting gently over his as he watched the room like it was a movie he didn't want to be part of. When the judge entered, everyone rose. I stood with my heart thudding in my chest trying to breathe evenly. My lawyer Danielle whispered to me, "Stay calm. Just answer directly, let them talk. We'll speak when it's time." Then the hearing began. Brandon's lawyer opened with a summary that made me feel like I was being reintroduced to the world as a stranger. She spoke clearly, confidently, and with a precision that made everything sound more dangerous than it was. She called me financially volatile and emotionally erratic. She used words like unstable home environment and pattern of inconsistency. She talked about my 3 jobs as though they were proof I couldn't provide structure, not as evidence of how hard I worked to survive. She claimed Jaden lacked routine male guidance and that Brandon's presence would provide the balance he was missing. Brandon didn't say a word. He just sat there, hands folded, nodding every few minutes as if everything being said was reasonable and measured. Like he wasn't the same man who disappeared when Jaden was still in diapers. Like he wasn't the one who had never sent a birthday card, never called on Christmas, never once asked how our son was doing until his life looked good enough to show him off. When it was our turn, Danielle pushed back. She presented my work records, statements from neighbors and my childcare schedule. She made it clear that Brandon had contributed nothing financially or emotionally to Jaden's upbringing. She reminded the court that I hadn't just raised a child. I had raised a good one, smart, kind, attentive. But then came the cross-examination. Carla came at me with questions designed to rattle me. She brought up a bounced rent check from 2 years ago, asked if I had ever been in therapy, questioned whether rotating caregivers, my neighbor on Mondays, my sister when she visited, created inconsistency in Jaden's life. Every answer I gave felt like I was handing her another stone to throw. Then she leaned forward and asked, "Miss Harper, would you describe your emotional state over the past 8 years as stable?" I felt the words freeze in my throat. What did that even mean? Was I stable when I cried in my car between shifts? Was I unstable for feeling overwhelmed sometimes? Was I less of a mother because I broke down at night when Jaden couldn't see? "I've done what I needed to do to keep my son safe, fed and loved," I said. "If that's not stability, I don't know what is." Carla looked down, scribbled something in her notepad, and said nothing, but I could feel it. the weight of doubt filling the room. The judge sat quietly taking notes. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just observed, and that terrified me more than anything. The final blow came when Carla delivered her closing statement. "Your Honor," she said, standing tall in her gray pantsuit, "we're not here to argue whether Miss Harper loves her child, that much is clear. But love does not substitute for stability, for structure, for long-term planning. Mr. LeClaire is prepared to offer a consistent two-parent household, financial security and legal resources to support Jaden's growth. Miss Harper, though well-intentioned, is emotionally unstable, financially incompetent, and fundamentally unfit to raise a child." She turned toward me as she said it slowly, deliberately. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but I didn't. I looked at the judge. He was nodding as she spoke, not in agreement necessarily, but in consideration. He was weighing it, turning it over in his head. I could feel the future hanging in that silence. Then I heard the chair behind me move, a soft scrape of wood on tile. Jaden stood up, not because anyone asked him to, not because he was told to speak, he just did. And in that moment, everything else stopped. That night after court, I couldn't sleep. I had tucked Jaden into bed around 9. He asked for a second bedtime story, something he rarely did on a school night. I knew it wasn't about the story. He just didn't want me to leave, so I stayed. I read Where the Wild Things Are and kissed his forehead when he finally drifted off. Then I went back to the kitchen and sat at the table with my head in my hands. The words from earlier wouldn't stop circling in my head. Emotionally unstable, financially incompetent, fundamentally unfit. I had been called names before. I had been criticized, judged, whispered about by strangers who thought they knew what kind of mother I was because I paid with coins at the grocery store or picked Jaden up 5 minutes late from aftercare. But hearing it like that in a courtroom with my future as a mother hanging in the balance was different. I stared at the old clock above the stove and asked myself the question I'd been avoiding. What if they believed her? What if everything I had sacrificed didn't matter? Around midnight I heard footsteps. Jaden was standing in the hallway rubbing his eyes, clutching the hem of his pajama shirt. "Why are you awake?" I asked, keeping my voice soft. "I had a bad dream," he said. "You were crying in it." He came over and climbed onto my lap, just like he used to when he was little. He was getting too big for that now, but he knew I needed it. I wrapped my arms around him and rested my chin on the top of his head. "I'm okay," I whispered. "Just a long day." Jaden pulled back and looked up at me. "Is the judge going to take me away?" I felt something break inside me when he said that, the fact that an 8-year-old even had to think about something like that. "No," I said firmly. "No one is taking you away, we're a team, that doesn't change." He studied my face for a long second. "You looked really sad today when that lady said all that stuff about you." I nodded. "It hurt, but I'm not sad because of her. I'm just tired of fighting so hard for things that should already be mine." Jaden leaned his head on my shoulder, then he said something I didn't expect. "Can kids talk in court?" I pulled back, confused. "Why?" "Because if the judge heard me he'd know she was lying." I blinked. "What would you say?" Jaden shrugged like it was obvious. "I'd tell him you do everything. You make breakfast even when you're late. You sing when you clean even though your voice is weird. You always make sure I have socks without holes, and you work hard, really hard." He should know that. I couldn't speak for a second. My throat was too tight. "I don't think the judge can let kids talk," I said carefully, "but you just telling me that means more than anything." Jaden sat up a little straighter. "If I had a chance I'd say it." He meant it. I saw it in his eyes. Not just love, not just loyalty, purpose. I kissed the top of his head. "Go get some sleep. We'll figure everything out tomorrow." But that night, I lay awake thinking about what he said. I thought about how many times I had told him, "Use your voice," whether it was at school when something wasn't fair or at home when he had a problem. I had always taught him to speak up, to be kind but strong, to never let someone else's story replace the truth. I also thought about Brandon. How easily he sat there, letting someone else destroy me without blinking. How quickly he stepped back into our lives not because he missed his son, but because it was convenient, and how even now, he didn't see Jaden as a real person. Just a symbol, a talking point, a photo opportunity. The next morning, I got Jaden ready for court like I had the day before. Same collared shirts, same clean sneakers, but something was different. He was calm, focused, like he had already decided what kind of day it was going to be. I wasn't expecting anything to change. I still believed the system would favor the man with the money, the polished lawyer, the life that looked good on paper. but I also knew I wasn't going to back down. Jaden slipped a folded paper into my purse when we were leaving. "What's this?" I asked. "Just something in case I don't get to talk." When I opened it later, it said, "My mom is everything to me. She never gave up. That's all they need to know." At that moment, I didn't care what the judge decided. I had already won where it mattered. Then came the courtroom. Then came the moment Brandon's lawyer made her final strike, calling me unfit for the third time. And that was when Jaden stood up. Not because anyone asked him to, not because I told him to. He stood because he had something to say, and he wasn't going to let anyone else speak for him. The courtroom had gone quiet. Not just the kind of quiet where people stop talking, but the kind that feels heavy, like the walls themselves are listening. Brandon's lawyer had just delivered her final blow. She stood tall, arms folded, her words echoing through the space like they belonged to some absolute truth. Emotionally unstable, financially incompetent, fundamentally unfit to raise a child. She paused for effect, letting the accusation hang there like a sentence. The judge leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, nodding slowly as he looked through his paperwork. He didn't make eye contact with me. That scared me more than anything that had been said all day. I felt my stomach tighten. My hands gripped the edge of the table. I didn't want to cry, not here, not in front of them. I swallowed the anger, the humiliation, the fear. I turned slightly to glance at Jaden, who was sitting behind me with my sister. He'd been quiet all morning, eyes fixed on the floor, legs swinging under the bench, but now he stood up. No one asked him to. No one even noticed at first. He just rose from the bench like he had decided something, like he couldn't stay silent any longer. "I want to say something." The judge looked up. Brandon's attorney turned her head, confused. I froze. "Jaden," I whispered, but he had already stepped forward. The judge cleared his throat. "Young man, this isn't typically allowed." Jaden didn't wait. He looked right at the judge and spoke with a voice that was steady, clear, and louder than I'd ever heard from him. "My mom raised me without his money. Without his help. She worked 3 jobs. She walked to work when our car broke down. She made me dinner even when she didn't eat. She never gave up." The judge's expression shifted. Brandon sat up straighter, his fiancée's jaw tensed. Jaden kept going. "She always shows up for school stuff, for everything. When I'm sick, when I'm scared, when I'm happy, she's there, not him. I only saw him twice before this, and one time I was too little to remember. He didn't help raise me. She did. She's the only parent I know." The room was silent, the kind of silence that feels sacred. The bailiff looked to the judge, unsure whether to intervene, but the judge raised a hand and said quietly, "Let him finish." Jaden's eyes were locked on the judge now. "I don't want to live with him, I don't even know him, but I know her, and I love her. And she's a good mom, the best one. So I don't think it's fair for someone to say she's not good enough just because she's tired or doesn't have a lot of money." He stood still, chest rising and falling fast. But his voice didn't waver. "She's more than good enough. She's everything." Then he stepped back, returned to his seat beside my sister, and sat down. No one moved for several seconds. It felt like the entire courtroom was frozen in place. The judge finally leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. He looked down at his papers, then back at me, then to Brandon, then to the attorney. "I've heard enough," he said. Brandon's lawyer started to object, but the judge cut her off. "I've made my decision." He looked at me directly now for the first time since we'd started. "This case is focused on financial hardship, emotional endurance, and household structure. But what's been clearly demonstrated today is love, presence, and resilience. I find no grounds to modify the existing custody arrangement. Primary custody will remain with Miss Harper. Mr. Leclerc may petition for supervised visitation to be reviewed at a later date." He paused, and I commend the child for speaking from the heart. His words have been noted in the record. I didn't hear anything after that. My body went numb. My head dropped into my hands and I let out a single breath I'd been holding for months. I wasn't crying, not yet. I was just trying to believe what I had heard. We had won. Not because I had the better lawyer, not because I had more money or proof or legal firepower. We had won because my son told the truth. Because he stood up in the face of adults in suits and said exactly what he saw, exactly what he felt. And for once, someone in authority listened. Brandon didn't look at me as he left the courtroom. He didn't even glance at Jaden. His fiancée walked 2 steps ahead of him, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The strength in their side of the room had cracked. There was no more performance left to hold up. Jaden reached for my hand as we walked out into the hallway. His fingers laced through mine, and he looked up at me like nothing unusual had happened. "I meant what I said," he told me. I knelt down to his level, cupped his face in my hands and said, "I know you did, and you saved us." The day after the court ruling I woke up to quiet, not silence from fear, like I had felt in the days leading up to the hearing, but a kind of stillness that felt earned. I didn't rush out of bed to pack a lunch or check the calendar or count my bus fare. I just laid there for a few minutes, watching sunlight creep across the ceiling. Jaden was still asleep in the next room. He had crawled into my bed after his bath the night before, curled up beside me with one arm across my chest. He hadn't said much when we got home from court. Just climbed into his pajamas, brushed his teeth, and asked for a hug that lasted longer than usual. There was a peace in our home I hadn't felt in a long time. A weight had lifted, and it wasn't just because we had won. It was because my son had seen everything I tried to shield him from and chose to speak anyway. For years, I tried to protect Jaden from the harder truths. I didn't want him to carry my pain, my struggle, or my exhaustion. I wanted him to have a childhood that felt as normal and soft as I could possibly give, but children always know more than we think. He saw me working those double shifts. He saw me counting coins. He heard me whispering to myself late at night in the kitchen, trying to make rent stretch without panic. And yet what he chose to remember, what he chose to tell that courtroom, was love. He told them the truth. I was too tired and too outmatched to explain. After the ruling, Brandon didn't try to talk to me. He didn't come over or send a message. He left the courtroom quickly and quietly, his lawyer walking 3 steps behind him. A few weeks later, his petition for visitation expired without renewal. He hasn't reached out again. Part of me still wonders why he came back in the first place. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was image, maybe it was convenience. But I know now that it never had anything to do with Jaden. Not really. Because if it had, he would have shown up long before court documents arrived in the mail. Mia stayed with us a few extra days. She cooked, did dishes, and watched movies with Jaden while I caught up on sleep. When she left, she hugged me and said, "He didn't just defend you. He proved you raised him right." Those words stayed with me. I didn't have the kind of childhood I wanted Jaden to have. My mother was strong but emotionally shut down. My father left when I was 11. I learned early on that being needed wasn't the same as being loved. I promised myself that when I became a parent, I would do things differently. I wouldn't disappear. I wouldn't break down in front of my child. I would show up every day no matter what, and that's what I did. I didn't raise Jaden in a big house. He never had brand-name shoes or the latest game consoles, but he had my time, my laughter, my listening ear. He had dinners made from scratch with whatever we could afford. He had mornings where I walked him to school even if I hadn't slept. He had bedtime stories, kisses on the forehead, and the kind of love that comes from deep in your bones. That's what he stood up to protect. It taught me something I'll never forget. We spend so much of our time as mothers trying to prove we're doing okay. We compare ourselves. We worry about how things look. We apologize for not having more to give. The children don't remember what brand of cereal was in the cabinet. They remember how you looked at them when they were scared. How you showed up even when you had nothing left. Jaden reminded me that being enough isn't about perfection or money or resumes. It's about presence, consistency, heart. Now months later, things are still hard. I still work long hours. I still juggle bills and stretch paychecks, but I don't carry the same doubt. I don't question if I'm good enough for my son because I know I am. And more importantly, he knows it too. He's doing well in school. He's taking piano lessons now thanks to a discounted program our neighbor told me about. He still writes little notes and folds them into my purse before I leave for work. Some say, "Love you," others say, "You got this." And sometimes when I find them halfway through a rough shift, they're the only thing that gets me through the next hour. I keep the note he tried to give me before court folded in my wallet, the one that said, "My mom is everything to me. She never gave up. That's all they need to know." That's the truth I live by now. And if you're out there, a mother holding everything together while the world keeps trying to tear you down, I hope you remember this. Your child sees you, even when no one else does. If this story touched you even just a little, please take a moment to like the video. It tells the platform that these kinds of stories matter. If you know someone who's fighting their own silent battle, share this with them. Let them know they're not alone. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Whether you've been through something similar or just want to say hi, I read every single one. And if stories like this speak to your heart, subscribe to the channel. There's more truth, strength, and healing ahead, and I'd love to have you with me for it. Thank you for watching. And remember, your voice, your story, your love, it matters more than you think.